Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Paraton's Mission Transition podcast. This is session number 6 of our 6-part series. So we are thankful for everyone that has joined us today. So we'll go ahead and jump right into it. I hope everyone's having a fantastic Friday. So we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves real quick. Since I'm already talking, I'll go ahead and jump right in. So I'm Brian Acton. I've been with Paraton 5 years now. I've been in talent acquisition 25 years now. I need to update the slide. And, I've done it across multiple sectors from the Department of Defense. I've done it on the federal government side, on the contract and corporate side, everywhere from, sourcing, full desk recruiting, technical recruiting, and the role I do now here at Paraton. I'm also a veteran of the Marine Corps and the Army. I've transitioned twice, both horribly. So I certainly have some advice I can give you on how to do it a little more effectively than I as well. So I've been out myself though for quite some time now. I got out in 2012, so hitting that 15-year mark or something now. It seems weird to even say it. But then I'll also go ahead and introduce our colleague Brett Buffington real quick. Unfortunately, Brent couldn't be with us today for some personal reasons. But some folks on the call may know Brent. He is part of our military and veterans talent program team here as well. He's been with Paraton a couple of years as well, and he supports our missions as well. He definitely works with our partners, works with our folks like yourselves to help them get employed here at Paraton as well. And without further ado, I'll let Jeff Carson go ahead and introduce himself. I'm sure many people on the phone call know Jeff Carson. He's everywhere all the time. Jeff, go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, good morning now, not quite afternoon yet. Let me first declare go Army beat Navy. Army-Navy game tomorrow. So, we're going to do it this year. I know we had a bad year last year, but we're going to change. Tomorrow's our day. So again, my name is that's my number one game of the year, the Army-Navy game. Nice. So again, my name is Jeff Carson. I'm also a retired Army veteran. Been retired now about almost 18 years. Former Army recruiter, and I've stayed in talent acquisition in the veteran community field for the entire time that I've been out, specializing in outreach, partnerships, transitional organization that support veterans to attract talent and to support the veteran community. One thing I'm always proud of is helping people find opportunities, whether it's with Paraton or whether it's with any other organization. So love what I do, love the veteran community and helping them in any possible way to help with finding employment.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Jeff. And Jeff is our resident road warrior, by the way. He goes to quite a few events for our team. I think our team in total this year will probably do what, Jeff? Probably 140 different events we'll participate in 2025. It's quite a bit. So,
so we're Jeff, out and about. We don't sit behind the laptop. We're out and about.
Jeff is everywhere. Jeff is everywhere. But so we'll jump in today's podcast and what we're going to really talk about. So we're talking about interviewing, right? We're talking about interview success. Now, when we talk about it, we know most folks on the call probably interviewed at least once or twice. Feel like you may have a handle on interviewing, but we promise with today's session and insights we're going to be able to deliver, you will absolutely learn something about preparing for an interview, conducting an interview, and closing an interview that you may not have really thought of or been told before on things that might be important, or how to structure yourself in some of these things so that you're really creating an impression to the individual that's interviewing you. So they're really thinking about you after the fact, right? Because that's really what it comes down to is when you leave an interview, you want that individual to think, yeah, this is a person I could hire at the end of the day. So what we're going to talk about, kind of a brief summary of the totality of everything we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about understanding the company, why it's important to familiarize yourself with the organization you're interviewing with, what they have going on, big headline news they may have going on, what kind of roles and missions they support, and make sure you're aligning yourself with those. Then we'll talk about the job description again, though, right? So that's one of our previous podcasts where we talked about decoding a job description, but we're going to talk about also how to utilize that job description in preparing for your interview and how to effectively do that in a manner so that you can interview relevantly to the role that's in front of you. Okay. And then we're going to talk about preparing answers. This is a big one. This is one of the most meatiest pieces of this, and I guarantee you will learn something on how to conduct yourself in an interview that will leave an impression. The tell me about yourself question, why do you want to work here, and really create answers that create confidence and relevancy to you for the work that you're interviewing for. And then we're going to talk a little bit about behavioral interview preparation, right? Those are some of the hardest questions to answer, but we're going to really talk to you about how to confidently prepare ahead of time for those questions. Even though you may not know exactly what the question you're going to be asked is, we're going to talk about how you can utilize that job description to prepare those questions so that you can come up with confidence, functional answers that will answer the question. Then we're going to talk about problem solving on the spot, right? Questions that you might get that you don't know how to answer, right? And how you can functionally make answers that can also still create your relevancy to the role. And then we're going to talk about asking meaningful questions. At the end of the day, that's kind of some of the final pieces you do in an interview, right? Where it's, what kind of questions do you have for me? Where you can ask questions that will also increase your relevancy to the role as well. So we'll go from there. Now, we do have the full session where folks can ask questions. Typically Q&A is after we've given a lot of the information. So feel free to type some questions into the chat box, but we may not be able to start answering some of them until we get to the end of the podcast. So the podcast should go about 50 minutes to an hour. And then after that, we'll stay on and continue to answer questions that, you can ask at that time, or we'll try to scroll through the chat and see what we may have missed as well. So we'll jump right in. So familiarizing yourself with the organization, there's several reasons why this is going to be important though, right? Because you need to do your homework on the organization that you're interviewing with, understanding their missions, the visions, the core values, the products and services and the target customers that they're working for, right? So when you're looking at Peraton's career website as an example, we have those kind of pages on our website there. You can familiarize yourself with our sectors, the work we do within those sectors, what our industry positioning is and what our core functions within those industries are. Looking at some of those about us sections on those industry websites for companies create for themselves, right? Because you want to have a certain understanding of what that organization is doing, because you want to be able to relate yourself to those missions, right? Now, chances are, we are a military and veterans program. So chances are many of the folks on the call today are veteran community folks. So being able to probably talk to some of those organizations you've probably already supported in the past, whether it's an Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps contract, Space Force contract, and those type of things. Or even if you're never served in the military and you have supported those organizations possibly, is still being able to create that relevancy with that bit of information, right? Staying current on company updates though too. So a lot of the stuff we do, I'd use Jeff and myself as an example. We post a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. So when you're curious about what an organization's doing, what is relevant and current to that organization, looking at those social media sites and understanding, like as an example, we just won this huge piece of FAA work, right? $30 billion contract. What's that mean? It's going to create a lot of roles. Have you looked at those roles? Have you seen your relevancy possibly to that work? And leveraging the online platforms. When you look at Peraton as a company, we're a cyber IT technologies style company, right? I mean, we have a lot of industry relevant technologies that we utilize and that we create. So looking at our company LinkedIn is also going to give you some very current information about what's happening now in the organization at the same time. I mean, it also helps you get a feel for the culture of the organization, what we're doing, how we're doing it, where we're doing it, those type of things, so that you're matching up and aligning yourselves with those, right? And that really helps you create a relevancy in the interview, because really what you want to start thinking about is, if you're going to be an employee here, how do you relate to the organization, and being able to speak to some of those things when you're asked some of these questions we're going to really start talking about as we progress through the podcast here. Now, Jeff, anything you would like to really add into this one? I know this is something we talk about a lot when we're out at events and stuff like that.
Yeah, those are some great points, Brian. Many organizations have a designated person or people that make sure that our websites, our awards, things on social media, on the website, it's up to date, and they don't just put it up there just to put it up there. So I know it can seem boring, especially in this mindset that we're in this fast pace where we don't read and we don't stop. But I would tell you, it's a good idea if you're, you know, you're interviewing for a company, you're targeting a company, to stay relevant on a lot of the things that they're doing. A company the size of Peraton, I have to stop sometime and read to find out what some of the
That's true, very true.
some of our own contract awards. We got hundreds of proposals, and so sometimes I'm a little surprised. I have to stop and say, you know what, let me go and look to see what new additions have been added. So that's, I mean, I know but you have to invest, and it's really going to be beneficial to you, like Brian said, when you're asked a question, or what do you know about our company. If you've been following them over a certain amount of time, you'll be able to show that you have a history with Peraton when it comes to following what we're doing, contract awards, and so forth. So yeah, take the time, slow down, become familiar with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is a relevancy thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want to do is be in an interview and someone say, well, what has you looking at Peraton, or why are you thinking of Peraton, and try to hip shoot it on the spot, though, because chances are you're probably going to be off enough that we're going to know that you didn't do any research on the organization, right? Now, it's not to mean that when you're asked those kind of questions, nobody's expecting you to be an expert on this organization and what the organizations do. And I mean, heck, I work here, like Jeff was saying, and we're such a large organization, and we're in a constant phase of growth and just creating a lot of new things that it's difficult to kind of keep up with. But it's talking about being able to make relevancy to the core of the business itself, though, right?
And I would tell you, one way to stay recent is, when you going through your LinkedIn, if you follow the company, they're going to post major accomplishments. They're going to mention community events, things that they do in the community, and volunteering and veteran and stuff like that. So it keeps you well rounded as far as the entirety of the company, not just contract awards, but what do they do, in the community and different things and like that. And so. Yeah. So when you're asked that question, it becomes fluent. You know a lot of different areas, and why you give a good sound reason as to why you're interested in working for the company.
Absolutely. And like I said, Jeff and I, we talk to a lot of people, so you'll be surprised how many people ask, "What does Peraton do?" So, tell me what Peraton does, when it's kind of supposed to be the other way around, right?
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and keep punching on through today. So job description mastery, really decoding and aligning for success. This is where the hard, deep lensing preparation for the interview really comes in, is really having that job description where you can start reviewing the sections, the responsibilities. A lot of roles at Peraton, we'll talk about the role responsibilities, kind of a synopsis, if you will, of the day-to-day operations of that specific role. Now, it's not necessarily going to go into massive 3 pages of detail, but it's going to give a base roles and responsibilities type thing on there. And then it's going to give the qualifications and requirements of those roles. So really what you can start to do with that job description, is highlighting key skills and qualifications that you're seeing in there that you have, so that you can start focusing your answers with some of those. Because what you got to start thinking about is, when you're going to get in an interview, we have structured interviews, right? So we're not just coming into interviews as interviewers, just haphazardly and just asking random questions. We're coming in with a core set of questions that we're going to ask each individual we're going to interview, right? And those core questions are going to come from where? The job description and the role itself. So when you start highlighting those key pieces of information, let's say you're I don't know, some kind of software engineer or something like that, and we're looking for someone that has a Bootstrap and maybe Java's or whatever, these other things, right? And you start seeing those kind of key qualifications and those keywords in there several times, chances are that's one of the core pieces of qualification that we're going to be looking for. So what you can do is really align your experience with those, because we're going to start talking about when we get into those deeper questions that we're going to get into here further in the podcast, how highlighting those and start keying into what experiences you have that meet that skill and requirement of that particular role can really help you put a real hard focus on yourself and create significant amount of relevancy for you for that role. Ask for clarification too prior to an interview. So what happens if you're looking at a role, right? So you're requesting an interview. Chances are a recruiter is going to reach out to you. Literally 100% of the time here at Peraton, I can speak to a recruiter will reach out to you to set up that interview, right? So that's your time to look at that job description. And if you've read that job description, we've all looked at a million job descriptions, and I can tell you I've read hundreds of thousands of job descriptions at this point where there's something in there you're like, I don't even know what they're looking for in this. What is this, or what is this tool? You could be a cybersecurity engineer, but there could be one thing that's listed on there. You're like, I've been doing this for 5-6 years. I have no idea what that is. That's your time to get clarification for those things prior to going into the interview, right? So that you can do that research prior to going in there, which will help you answer some questions you might get down the road. And we'll talk about those, how to prepare for questions you don't know the answer to or don't have experience in, right? So that's where that's going to become key, is looking at that job description when that recruiter's contacted you to set up the interview, to make sure you don't have any questions about, that you can clarify any information about that role prior to that. Because the recruiter wants you to get hired, right? So that they want to give you the information. If you don't know something or you're unsure about something, ask. They're more than happy to give you that information, I promise. And what that's going to do, as we get into further in the presentation, we're going to talk about the STAR method. Using that job description to look at those qualifications, requirements, and daily responsibilities of that role is going to help you create impactful examples of your STAR examples, right, for your behavioral questions. So it's going to help you showcase those skills, focused and relevant to that role once you've extrapolated those skills and information from that role, right? So, that's my piece on it. Jeff, what about you? I know this is one we talk about quite a bit with the folks we work with.
Yeah, as far as the STAR, I think this is a crucial one, especially when you're, depending on the level of position that you're applying for. If it's high level position, very technical, usually if it's non-entry level, having those STAR stories, prepared. Because you may have numerous STAR stories, but you don't want to find yourself like, guessing and trying to remember those stories. You should already kind of have those examples ready. Most people have them, but it's just like, and that you may be asked that type of question, but you want to have a few already ready, at the ready, as far as, when you're asked some type of situational type question. So they will happen, especially if you're talking senior level or some type of leadership role. They're definitely going to ask that. Sometimes maybe not so much in entry level, because it may be just really black and white as far as what, the questions may be really simple, where they may not be asking many in-depth situational questions like that. But they are important, and you do need to have those prepared. I believe you should have them prepared already.
And we're going to do a deeper dive into those what STAR is and how to utilize it as well here coming up. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about answer preparation though, right? So crafting confident interview responses. This is where it really gets down into it. And this is where you can really start highlighting who you are against that role, right? And you'll notice throughout this podcast, we'll keep talking about relevancy and focus, right? Because that's how you should be structuring your preparation for your interview, right? It should always be about your relevancy to the role, and your answer should be focused within the relevancy to the role and the key qualifications, right? So, one of those major kickoff questions, right? If you've been in enough interviews, 9 times out of 10, one of the first couple questions, you might get a little chit chatter at the very beginning. How you doing? Oh, I hope your week's going good. Blah, blah, blah. But what's going to happen is the interview is going to officially start at some point, right? What's typically one of the first 1 or 2 questions you're going to get out the gate? So tell me about yourself, right? They want to know who are you, right? So this is your chance to really focus it in because you'll be surprised. I could ask right now, and I've done it. I could ask 20 people right now in an interview, tell me about yourself, and it's going to go wild, right? It's going to go all over the place. I'm going to get people telling me about how they're the pickleball champion of 2024. They love cars. They like playing basketball. They do all these weird things. That's awesome. That's great. It created zero relevancy for you towards this role. So this question, what we really want you to understand, this question isn't necessarily a personal question, right? It's an interview. We're not really getting personal, are we? No, we're asking you, tell me about yourself. Tell me why you're sitting in front of me is really the question they're asking. Well, that's your chance to say, well, I'm a cybersecurity professional. I've been doing this 15 years. I've done it across these sectors. These are parts of it that I'm passionate about, which then you should be relating to the job description, right? To create that relevancy and focus. These are parts of it I'm passionate about. And I'm really interested in working for Peraton because of all these types of things. And this is where, I really feel like I could fit in over there, and it just feels great. I'm really excited about being able to talk to you today because of this role and how I fit for it, those type of things. It's not to tell us all these personal things in your life. So there's a million ways to craft it. Tell me about yourself, but it shouldn't be anything other than how you relate to the role and what you've been doing in your career prior to this moment, right? So it should be relevant specifically to that. No, I know me and Jeff probably have story after story to tell on this one because we do a lot of interview prep stuff. And this is usually one of the first questions we ask. Tell me about yourself. And it goes off the rails for me pretty much 80% of the time. So.
Yeah. And it's really an icebreaker. It's not a got you question. It's a really to, like Brian said, to open up the interview process. It's not a got you question. It's to make you relax and to just kind of give you a summary. In a scenario, it could be another person that they invited into the interview, to the call, or if it's in person, they may have brought them in. So they may have just, didn't have a chance to really go in depth in your resume. And so, and they just want to hear you talk. They want to hear, are you confident? It shows whether you're prepared. It shows whether you have an understanding about that question. And for those of you that may be nervous, I always tell you, if you're kind of new to interviewing and you haven't, you get nervous at times, prepare that response, have it ready, rehearse it. And as Brian mentioned, is a summary about your background. I mean, if you're prepared, if you rehearse it, it'll flow faster. You'll be more confident. You'll be less nervous. And it'll be like a mental check block. Yeah, it's like the guy's like, okay, sounds good. Now let's move on to the next question. So
absolutely, and it might sound difficult at first to talk about yourself like that, but it's really not, because what you should probably the easiest thing you should be able to do is tell somebody what you've been doing career-wise for the past couple years, that type of thing. Like that should be easier to do than telling someone about personal things in your life in that sense as well. So,
and Brian, to add also as well, Brian, I think even if you're experienced and you've done hundreds of interviews, I've seen in some cases where really seasoned people go too long. They're too in depth. They're trying to talk about the entire resume instead of a summary. So I've seen it both ways. I've seen some inexperienced people that really know how to answer it. And I've seen some seasoned people where it's like you've been talking for 4 minutes now, and it's like you just went over your entire resume, and that's not what they had. So even the seasoned people really need to be focused on what they are going to say when they ask that question, because they'll ask more of the in-depth stuff. I've seen many times where I'm just like too much information.
Right.
Mock interviews, I'm like, you just gave me your entire career.
Right. It's not a dump. It's not an information dump. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, you can kind of even relate it to kind of like your objective statement or your executive summary on your resume. Very something similar and short like that. It shouldn't take, 5 minutes to deliver it because you might only have a half-hour interview, right? Yeah. So, kind of like Jeff said, you definitely don't want to, be a windbag out there, right? 10 minutes later, be like, holy smokes, put me to sleep telling me what you did in 1995. That kind of stuff. So be wary of that as well. It's your elevator pitch basically, right?
Yes.
So what are your strengths and weaknesses? those are things to look at, when you're focused on strengths that match job requirements and company goals. Those are things you should be have identified up front. You know, supporting strength with specific examples, right? And emphasize transferable skills that set you apart. Especially if you're doing kind of a career transition, right? So you want to be able to create multiple forms of alignment to the role, right? You may not have 20 years of experience specifically directly in that skill set, but you have 20 years of experience. So you want to make sure you're creating relevancy with that other pieces of experience, right? But not overwhelming yourself that you're talking only about the other experiences you've had over the past 20 years. Um, and weaknesses, you want to acknowledge an area, a real area for growth, and share exactly, how actively improving it or managing it at the same time. Um, just using myself as an example, like I got this role here at Peraton. I remember during the interview, who is now my boss here asked me, what I knew about the SkillBridge program. I didn't know terribly much about the SkillBridge program. It didn't exist when I got out. So that was my answer. I said, well, I don't terribly know much about the SkillBridge program, but I related it to another internship program that I had worked on before and, created the relevancy. So it really said, I don't know the intimate details of the SkillBridge program, but I've done internship programs very similar with service members and was able to create a matching relevancy there, though. And then lo and behold, I became SkillBridge program manager here at the same time. So not necessarily knowing something doesn't mean you're not going to get the job. But what you do want to do, especially when it comes to weaknesses or things that you don't know, and we'll talk about this again, is creating that relevancy, though, right? Take something you have that's relevant, though. You don't want to go, off the rails and pick something out of the blue. You want to know where there's a relevancy match, though, that there's something that's similar that I've worked on, and this is how I feel like I could probably jump right into this and get a handle of it pretty quick in that kind of sense. And the old fancy dancy question, why do you want to work here? You know, that's one. It depends on where you're interviewing, how often you're going to get that, or who's interviewing. Maybe probably even the level of the role is going to determine, the importance of this question. But this is where that pre-work you've done on company research comes in that we were talking about earlier, where you can highlight why you want to work here based off what the company does. That's where you want to create that relevance. Well, hey, I see Peraton just won this huge piece of FAA work. I've been doing radar work with this type of system for, the past 10 years. And I see you guys are doing a new, creating a whole new, radar system for the United States. And I really wanted to be part of that transformation, that type of thing. So creating that relevancy from that kind of information helps someone that's interviewing you picture you doing that role at the same time. So that's why, these are some of the basic questions you get out the gate, right? Tell me about yourself. What are some of your strengths and weaknesses? Why do you want to work here? But being able to have had your elevator pitch ready, if you will. I hate to call it an elevator pitch, but it's a tell me about yourself. It's tell me about what your career background and career path would look like, and what does your future goals are. What are your career progression goals here? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Look at the job description, look at the skills that are on there, look at the qualifications and requirements of the role that they're looking for, and identify on your own before you're asked that question where you might have a weak spot to be able to answer that directly on that call. And then the why do you want to work here, to have done in that research, so you've got those three things covered by some very basic upfront interview preparation, right? And as we're talking about some of these things though too, before Jeff jumps in, I'll add in real quick. Keep in mind when we talk about interviewing, there's nothing that ever says you can't come to an interview with a notepad of notes that you've taken before the interview, right? Like that's a very acceptable thing to do. That's not taboo. As a matter of fact, it shows the interviewer that you prepared for the interview because you have notes in front of you. You've prepared. Nobody's asking you to be, this huge brain of information that you just remember everything ever. Take these notes, put them down where you've done this research, have it there in front of you. So when you're interviewing, you have a reference point. And there's nothing wrong with taking these short pauses. If somebody says, Well, tell me what some of your strengths and weaknesses, tell me one of your strengths or what are your weaknesses is, and you can look at those notes and you've identified, well, I'm okay with Microsoft Excel, but I struggle with pivot tables, but what I'm trying to do is do this and that to really get better at doing pivot tables, yada, yada, that kind of thing. So go ahead, Jeff.
And that's a great point, Brian. I think most people think having a notepad is something. That's something I always tell people. When you go to an interview, you need to have a notepad, and you need to have some questions and some things. But I think those three that you've kind of covered. Tell me about yourself, strengths and weaknesses. You may not be asked these particular every single one of these, but it is a great idea to have already have those answers that you've either annotated, that you already have in mind, just in case they come up and someone asks you that. Why do you want to work here? That can be a many things. For somebody in the military, you could have worked for an agency and worked next to a Peraton employee, and you watched their company, you watched their people. It could be a lot of different reasons as to why you want to work there. It doesn't have to be generic. It can be a real reason as to why. I think it's an excellent point, Brian, with the notepad, but I would tell you, answer these questions and then have them ready, just in case you're asking and you're not scrambling trying to figure it out. But we all have reasons. It could be someone why you want to work here. Well, I know a guy, a Peraton employee that works here. We've been knowing each other for a few years, and he always speaks highly about your company and the work that he does, or the agency that you guys support. I've worked for that agency. You can make it personal as well. It doesn't have to be just something that you saw just on social media on the website.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic add-in about those are personal questions. Of course, you want to, like we always say, keep it relevant and focused. But this is the time to say, this is why I like this. This is why I'm here. Those type of things. So jumping on down the line here, the good old behavioral interview questions. This is where you can really start setting yourself apart from other folks that may be interviewing for the role, right? If you've really prepared for your behavioral interview questions, this is your bread and butter of getting a role practically at that rate, right? Because even if you mess up to tell me about yourself, chances are you won't be the first person they've interviewed that goes off the rails with that, right? But the behavioral interview questions, and these are really going to determine who you're going to be as an employee and what your knowledge really stems from, right? So some examples of behavioral interview questions, would be like, tell me about a time you were a part of a team and, you didn't get along with a member of the team. How did you handle that situation and how did you overcome that? So when you start getting those kind of big questions like that, if you're trying to come up with answers for those on the spot, it's a struggle. It's going to be a struggle to effectively come up with a complete answer that's going to make sense to the person that's listening to it, though, right? Because when you come up with some answers of length like that on the spot, it'll make sense in your own head, but it won't to the person that's listening to it because they don't have the full context of the actual situation, right?
Yeah.
That you might be talking about. So that's just an example of one, but it could be even as simple, tell me the time you were working on a project and you weren't able to meet the deadline. What did you do? How did you handle that situation? That kind of stuff. So it's not always going to be about, tell me about the time you were, the Superman of the team and you always won everything. Some of the questions are going to be asked, tell me about a time you failed, because we've all had deadlines. We've all done something for work that we just weren't able to complete to tasks within time, right? So what happens when you do that, though? What's your recourse of action from that, right? So that's why these are very important questions, and they are a very important part of the interview. So they're going to come in many ways, shapes, and form. Certainly you can Google behavioral interview questions, and they're going to give you a list of questions that you might be asked, and those are going to be very common questions, right? But really what they do is they help the interviewer evaluate how you've handled real life situations and predict your future performance in possible the same situation, right? It also reveals your skills, decision making, and cultural alignment through past experiences. So those are going to be big when you start looking at that. So, you can start to how to structure your STAR method, though, right? So this is where really looking at that job description is going to come into play, right? Because when you're giving your, so STAR method does stand for situation, task, action, and results, right? So when you're giving those answers in a STAR method format, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, aligning it with the job description though and relevancy to the work is absolutely key though, because if you give me a STAR method answer about something that's completely in left field that I've never even heard of, say I'm asking you a question about a entry level, or say like a help desk tier 2 role, and you're going off about something you did in the military 15 years ago as a tanker. I'm not going to be able to create any relevancy to how you actually handled that situation, though. That's why that's important. Because if you go off the rails and it's not relevant to the role, chances are I'm probably a pretty good expert in the role I'm interviewing you for to some level, right? I'll know what's required for the role I have. So if you go off the rails and go left or right of the question, it gives me no access or ability to be able to determine, did you handle that situation right? Because I'm not a tanker. I'm not this. I'm not that. I have no idea if that's the right way to handle that. So you have to keep it relevant to the role. And that's why that's very important. And I'll tell you why, though, too, because you're going to ask 15, if they're going to interview 8 people, 5 people, let's say, and they're going to ask those same kind of behavioral interview questions, chances are, if they're interviewing 5, 3 people probably went off the rails with that question. So if you're one of the 2 that didn't, you're already boosting your candidacy up that list, right? Because you'll be surprised how many people don't prepare STAR method answers for relevancy and focus at that role that they're interviewing for. And that's why it's important. All right. So continuing on with the behavioral interview questions. I wanted to put some sample questions out there. Tell me about a time you resolved a conflict within a team. Describe how you met a tight deadline. What was your approach? Because they might want to know, how do you handle a tight deadline? If the customer calls this today and says, hey, we need this by, 1600 today, how do you approach that? How do you get that done within the team? Share a challenge you encountered on a project and how you overcame it. But create that relevancy. Talk about a time you had to adapt major workplace change. How did you handle it? These are the kind of questions you're going to get. So preparing answers for those is absolutely key. Now, it doesn't have to be an exact thing, right? Like in that sense, like obviously we know you can't predict what behavioral question you're going to get answered in an interview, right? But if you've created some STAR method answers, you're going to have a foundational piece of information to start yourself with, though, if that makes sense. What are your thoughts on this one, Jeff, as far as creating?
It is like, yes, it's not like it's not like what the question is going to be, but these are typically the types that they're gonna give you, and as you mentioned last slide, Brian, that you don't always come out successful when they ask you, some of these questions. It may end where we didn't need it, but in some cases, these types of questions, they're asked to so when you're asked these particular questions, going back to your situation, there may be some counter, like if someone gives you some type of tight deadline, your response may be, is there some flexibility on this timeline? In the scenario of your response where you've had to tell your superiors, you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the people, can the deadline be extended? Are these particular things a must-have? Are they optional? Do we have to have these things? So when you start getting into these types of questions, it's really a conversation that you're kind of having with the interviewer, in your response.
Absolutely. And I think there's themes you can kind of work with though too when we start talking about preparing for these, right? Because it's either going to be, tell me about a time you had a conflict, tell me about a time you couldn't meet a deadline, or you failed at something. Basically, right? It's going to be a success, a conflict, or a failure. So you're going to want to create 3 of those at least, right? And typically they're not going to get it can depend on how technical the role is, right? So if you will, but typically, it's not going to be a 3 sentence question. Tell me about the time you were trying to shoot for the moon, but you ended up at Mars, but then you went around the axis of that. And, like they're not going to ask such multi-point things like that. Like it's pretty much going to be that basis, a success, a conflict, and a failure. And you start creating star methods from there. Because what you don't want to do is just completely try to throw a softball at it and think you're going to nail the question.
Right.
Because it's really hard to come up with a situation, a task, an action, and a result on the fly, though, if you're trying to create relevancy to a role, though. So if you've already, identified your couple situations, your couple tasks, actions, and your results being, actions, we did, we were supposed to submit this to the customer by 1600, but the deadline was too tight and we couldn't put it. So what's your result of that failure? How did you overcome the failure though? Or what was your next actions? Those type of things,
And then, Brian, also, in many cases when you're responding about what the end result was, you can also add into the next time this situation happens, we're going to look at it this way, or we're going to tackle it this direction. So we've, most of the time when you failed at something, now you understand the next time this happens, this is the way we decided to go next time this situation happens, or this deadline happens, or this task happens. Instead of going at it this way, we'll go at it a different way. So, in many cases, people like to hear that. Okay, you failed, but now what did you learn from it? Next time that happened, we've decided that we're going to do this, or reach out to support and stuff like that. So, just think. I believe that if you think about your star response, it's usually going to come out to after what happened. What are you going to do next time to make sure that it's not, so that this doesn't happen again? And in most cases, that's how jobs are. Jobs are you're being interviewed, you're being hired for a position because there's a lack, there's a need, there's problems, and they just want to know how would you tackle it.
Right. And I think for me, one of the big ones on here too is that second block on the tips for answering the questions. To be genuine, share honest experiences, even difficult ones, because it shows that growth and resilience, right? Because I think we all know over time, we've all had roles, we've all had jobs, regardless of how much you like your role, there's always going to be a period of resilience, right? Or where you have to have growth, and those type of things. So, really being genuine in those answers is going to really help. And having prepared some of these instances and scenarios is going to help you be way more genuine. Because I can tell you, when you ask these questions from the interviewer side, when when somebody's softballing the question versus when someone's giving a general answer or giving a prepared answer, because it's going to start lacking specific details, even though then too, right, where it's going to be a very cookie cutter answer you're probably going to get from someone versus someone that's prepared a genuine, honest experience and answer. It's going to include details that you're going to feel that this is a genuine, okay, all right,
Yes.
that type of thing. So, you agree with that, Jeff? Like you can know.
You definitely,
because
it is. I mean, you're dead on with that. And as you mentioned earlier, Brian, they're not looking for the perfect candidate. And you're not going to get an A+ on every single response that you have during an interview. So just get prepared for that. And I know you're going to mention later, there's going to be times where you just don't have a really good response to it, and it's okay. No one's going to be. But if you're genuine and like you said, people can tell that this person knows how to tackle problems. They know how to reach out for support. They know how to, gather information. Go through the process. Solving problems is a process, and sometimes these behavior questions is, how did you solve this problems, and what was your process?
Absolutely. And it sounds, if you haven't done that before, if you haven't really prepared STAR method and questions and answers, it sounds like an arduous task, right? But I promise it's really not. Because what you're going to find out though is we all fall in a genre of work though, right? Like I'm not going to randomly today start applying for, I'm a talent acquisition professional, so I'm not going to start applying to, software developer roles because I'm not a software developer. So once I've prepared my star things, my star questions, my star answers, they're probably going to remain relevant for multiple roles I might be applying to and interviewing to. So you don't necessarily have to do that much after you've created the initial um, information for yourself, if you will, right? Because then what'll happen is you'll get a lot better at talking about it over time, then though too, in that sense. So think of it
And you
like
just
that.
mentioned, Brian, you mentioned relevant. You mentioned relevance, Brian. When you see that job description, you get your star responses and make them relevant to that job description. You said that right.
Too easy. And so now we'll jump into. So we got about 15 minutes till we go into the Q&A. Hopefully we got some good stuff coming in here shortly. So we'll talk about problem solving strategies for interviews, right? So I've interviewed plenty of times where I've been asked questions that I just don't know the answer to. If I couldn't create relevancy, I'm like, I had no idea what that is. Those type of things. So what you can really do though, there's ways to overcome that. And not knowing something doesn't mean you don't have the job though. I can guarantee you that. It
Yes.
may even be that you're doing so well in the interview up to this point that the interviewer's thinking like, man, I really need somebody that can, I just use myself as an example. I don't have the Excel abilities that my boss does, right? Like she's a Excel master compared to
Yeah.
me though, right? So she like
And me
tell me to
too.
do stuff in Excel and I have to be like, oof, I don't know if I can create that kind of data off that. I mean, I can generally use it, but if you want me to create graphs and charts and pivot tables and pie charts, and I'm starting to get out of my league here fast.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So, not knowing a tool, that person may be envisioning something else that where you might be a fit as a, something where they need assistance, so they're just checking to see, are you that one person, nobody around here knows that. Are you the one person that might? No. Okay. That type of thing. But when it comes to those questions you don't know, certainly, um, well, problem solving strategies for interviews. So we're not questions you don't know yet. I'm a little ahead of myself, Certainly stay calm and composed, take a deep breath and steady yourself, maintain confident composure and tone. I think everybody knows that, right? But it's okay to take pauses. I think for me, that's probably the biggest one is it is okay to take pauses, especially if you've brought your notes, you've got notes, whether you're doing an in-person interview or you're doing a video interview like this, because we do them both here. We do in-person, we do, video interviews. It's okay to have notes, to pause, to look at your notes, to ask for a second, that kind of thing. That's okay to do those kind of things because that shows preparation at the same time. It doesn't show that you don't know what you're talking about in any way, shape, or form. Ask follow-up questions if something's unclear, and absolutely request additional context to a question to fully understand it. I can certainly tell you, I'm one of those people that does do that. I've been in interviews where, you're nervous and you're really focused on the question that's being answered. And by the time you're done asking the question, I might have forgot the first half of the question, but God, like my brain's flying 1,000 miles an hour trying to think on the fly here and forgot some of the questions. Like, can you repeat that one real quick? I just want to make sure I got that. It's okay to do that kind of stuff. Buy time gracefully. That's a great question. Let me think about that for a moment. Just make sure don't create an awkward silence, if you will. Like if Jeff stops talking to me and then I wait 30 seconds to respond, that's going to be weird. Versus if Jeff stops talking and I say, give me a sec. Let me, that it's not weird anymore. Right. So that's all we're saying is just don't make it weird.
Right.
Just say like, let me look at my notes real quick. And you can even say that, let me look at my notes real quick. I prepared for this. That's okay to do that kind of stuff. Break down the question. You might get 2-part questions, especially when you start talking about the behavioral interview questions, right? That sometimes that's where you might have to jump back in and seek a little more clarification and context in some of those questions, because those ones can be tricky if you're not prepared for them too. So the more prepared you are for them, the less tricky they become. Certainly analyze questions and find what's familiar fast. to you. So that's what you can start focusing on. Absolutely always relate to relevant experiences. I know we've been saying a lot, but it should be in your brain the whole time that you're there. You're there in a job interview. So all your answers should be relevant to why you're there, which is for a job and this particular type of skill. So when you're creating your answers, connect your answers to the challenges of that job, right? Showcase your
Brian, and Brian, not to interrupt, but also when you're talking about um, uh, relevant experiences, many times in the military, we have certain systems that may be a little bit different from what's in the civilian sector. So if there's a program or a system that the civilian system, for example, ISIMS, which is our applicant tracking system.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, in USREC, Army Recruiting Command, I'm pretty sure there's some type of. I mean, I've been out of the Army for a while. I'm pretty sure there's some type of applicant tracking system that they have, and so you could counter with, we don't have ISIMS while I was in the Army, but we have this type of system. It's similar to what ISIMS is, and you do want to know what ISIMS is, whether you've used it or not. If that's in the job description, it may have. If you're applying for a talent acquisition position, and they may have experience in these 3 applicant tracking systems. Look them up, know what they're used for, and then you may counter with, "Hey, we have something similar in the military." So it's I catch on pretty fast. I don't think I'd have a problem learning, the civilian applicant tracking system. So it's okay to counter. You don't always have to just say, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of that one before. But if you know what that is, and then you can always relate it and say, "Hey, we use a different system in the Army or the Air Force."
Yeah, and that's a fantastic example of how to do that relation, though, too. Even since I've been out myself, in talent acquisition and recruiting is, pretty much every time I've changed companies ever, they've had a different applicant tracking system that I didn't use, right? So it was pretty much like, well, I've used Bullhorn before, but I know I can go here and use Workday. Within no time flat, I'll be able to get in there. It's, I can get in there probably within a day or two and fully be able to disposition candidates through the whole process, that type of thing. So, showcase processes when you can, certainly demonstrate how you logically approach new problems, talk through your steps in decision making when you can. And if no direct experience, use hypothetical scenarios, but relevant ones. If no direct experience, provide a reasonable way you would try to overcome, or logic and how you would do this piece of information, right? Or this particular task. Certainly be honest and transparent. If you don't know, say respectfully, I have no idea. But demonstrate willingness to learn, right? Of course, you're going to want to be a little bit more, interview tactically proficient, and then you're saying, well, I don't know. But maybe ask clarification or for further information where you can hopefully try to find something to relate it to and be relevant to. But if you can't, you can't. Sometimes you gotta be like, I really don't know what that is. But if it was in the job description, you should have some kind of knowledge, because if you didn't know it and it was in the job description, you're kind of failing yourself there, because you should have been able to look it up and be like, hey, I don't know what this is. But you can say, well, I know it does this, because if you have to say I don't know, I mean, if it was in the job description, you failed yourself, though.
That's true, Ryan. Too many tools today.
There really is. But what I'm saying, though, too, is sometimes they might ask you something that's outside of that, though, right? Where you just might have to say, I don't know what that tool is. And you can maybe ask, can you tell me what it does? Can you give me a short thing of what it does? And then once they tell you, then you're like, oh yeah, well actually you worked on a tool like this. So that's where asking clarification and seeking context on some of those things can come in. Because I don't know is probably one place you don't want to go if you can't. But if you've asked, can you tell me what that one does real quick so I can see if I can create relevancy? You can even ask. That's why you're saying that. Like, there's nothing against. Well, can you tell me what it does quickly, and I can see if I can create relevancy to it, because I'm not sure I understand this one.
Right.
So some good ideas here to help you get through some interviews and be a good interviewer or interviewee. in that sense. Um, so asking meaningful questions during an interview, this is a key piece of it as well, because it's going to really help the interviewee understand where you're at in the process of seeking the role, right? Um, Let me go off so gain clarity on job expectations is probably a big one for me too. What are the primary responsibilities and goals of this role? How is performance measured or success defined in this role? How often are performance reviews conducted? What does success in this position look like? What opportunities exist for advancement and skill development, mentorship programs that exist. There's quite a few you can get into this about, but there's some don'ts as well, though, right? So you definitely want to stay away from things that are probably on the website anyway, which are going to be, what's paid, what's vacation time look like, what are the benefits, health benefits, those type of things. That's something you shouldn't really be asking during an interview. If you have those questions, you should have been asking that to the recruiter before the interview, or done the
Yes.
research online, because those aren't really, they're just not setting a good tone if you're asking those kind of questions, because they're not relevant to the role or the organization in that sense, because those are static things that you can just about get anywhere. Because I can guarantee if you go on our website, we do give example of our full benefits breakdown at Paraton. Now it's not going to give costs and everything like that, yada yada. That's proprietary information, right? So, but those are things you definitely shouldn't be asking about, in that sense, though, too. Jeff, anything you want to like that on this one?
I mean, you hit on the head. Those are things that, the person that's interviewing you probably wouldn't know those things as well. But I would say probably one of the most important ones that you mentioned, Brian, was what are the primary responsibilities and goals of this role, and how performance is measured. But I would say you need to know, on day 1, 5 days, and primarily because you can be working in a team, and for example, our team, we all we do a lot of different things, but we all have primary areas that we focus on. As to what I'm like, as Brian mentioned, I'm at a lot of different events on the road. Brian's the guru of SkillBridge. So if they say for example they were interviewing somebody for my role, they would definitely ask, that's definitely a question you should ask. What are the responsibilities? They would probably say, hey, we need you to go to job fairs. We need you to get to capital. You know what I mean? So you're not shocked as to what are the expectations for. So I would say that's probably one of the most important. I would say,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then I'll leave it at, I have like my favorite last question to ask, at the very end of the interview, because typically they'll ask one last time, any other questions I can answer for you. Probably my favorite last question to ask on a call with an interviewer, in person, telephone, video, you name it, is something very similar to, well, after talking to me today, do you have any concerns or anything I could clarify on why I might not be a fit for the role?
I love that one
so
too.
Basically,
Ryan.
what you're asking is saying, do you think you're basically saying, did I pass the interview, right?
Yeah.
Like, did I pass this interview, right? But you're asking it in a way that has to give them an answer, because or for two things, right? If if they still weren't sure on something, that's the interviewer's chance to ask you, well, I actually wasn't too sure about, your experience with stigging. I'm still not 100% clear on it. That's your chance to clear that up before it's said and done. Or they're going to say, which I always love to hear after I ask this question, well, no, after talking with you, Jeff, it's been great. I really don't see any reason why you wouldn't be a fit for the role. That kind of thing. So what they leave that phone call with then? I either clarified anything they were unsure about, or the last really thing they said to me was, well, hey Jeff, I think you're qualified for the role. Basically, I think you're good for the role. So they're leaving the phone call with that in their own head though too, right? At the same time, and I got to tell you, for me, when I've asked that question, it's pretty rare that if I can't clarify the information, it's just getting beat out by a better candidate. It's outrageous.
Yeah.
which you certainly does happen as well in that sense. But that's a very successful question. But some version or thereof of that, and that's usually the final question I ask before we get off the phone.
It's an excellent one. It's because you want to know. That's a way of gauging whether you feel like you're still in the running. When you follow up, you can mention that, if you're following up with the recruiter, hey, he mentioned this. And also, even if they say, well, we're looking for someone that has familiarity with this particular system or whatever, it gives you a chance to rebuff and say, hey, even though I've never worked on this before, I'm a fast learner. There was a situation in my last job where it was something I didn't, system I wasn't familiar with. I picked it up in a week or two, or if it's a certification, I'm currently working on that certification. I should have it in the next 60 days. Give you a chance to to rebuff and to respond to overcome maybe that thing that they're looking for. So yeah, because it may be you and two other people that don't have that particular background on that particular system or program or something. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, that pretty much concludes the base of the information. We're about to jump into the Q&A, folks. So if you got questions, go ahead and start dropping them in there. But what we wanted to cover real quick, and this will go across the board though too. So if you're reaching out to not just us, but if you're reaching out to folks on LinkedIn and stuff like that, we just wanted to kind of give you a base format of how to do this correctly, how to reach out to people in the talent acquisition community a little more correctly, so you're going to get some responses that you're looking for. If it's the first time you've ever reached out to us, absolutely attach your resume, but you're still going to have other information to provide, right? Include any job role IDs you've applied to. Everything's a digital world now, so every role on the internet has a job ID attached to it. You kind of can't miss them on there, but if you can, it's going to be some series of numbers and letters or numbers or something. Include those into that initial email, or if you've already been in contact with us. And if you've applied to a role, highlight your relevant qualifications. Jeff, I applied to your help desk tier 2 role. Here's my resume. Here's how I felt like I met the qualifications. I've been a help desk tier 1 for 12 years. This and that experience, Security Plus certification, Network Plus certification, I have ability handling such and such phone calls, blah, 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 blah. Those kind of things. Because you're going to want to tell us why you're qualified for the role though too. So be patient on response time when you're reaching out to talent acquisition, folks. We get high volumes of inquiries, right? And when I say high, I will let you know that Peraton gets like 70,000 applications a month, right? So when you don't hear things, there's a reason, because it's just too much volume. But for folks like ourselves, like Jeff, myself, and Brent here on Military and Veterans team, we're out and about doing a lot of events and stuff like that, though. But we do say, give us like 48 hours, 72 hours to try to get a response back to you. Really kind of depending what's going on, but we're pretty quick though. I gotta say, we're not folks that sit on emails. Avoid asking general questions about openings though, right? So probably one of the biggest reasons you will not get a response from a talent acquisition professional is if you're reaching out to us and you shoot us our resume. Hey, Jeff, here's my resume. I'm in the job market. Anything you think I'm qualified for? No. I don't. No. There's nothing you're qualified for, because I don't know your qualifications. I can look at your resume, great, but that gives me no other information about you as far as what you want to do, where you want to do it, maybe who you want to do it for, as far as like customer support, anything like that. There's a lot of other information that's missing from someone other than just a resume and some qualifications though too. And although a lot of folks ask, well, why not? Isn't that what you guys do? No, it's not what we do. What we do is align folks with their qualifications to roles in that sense, right? So we don't do job hunting for people though. So if someone gives us your resume and says, what am I qualified for? I don't know, bro. Careers@peraton.com is our career site. Go look at the jobs. Let us know what you're qualified for. And then we can start advocating for your applications from there, right?
Yes.
In that sense. Jeff, something you'd like to add on this one? I know.
Yeah, Brian, that's a big one. I mean, that general, 90% of the population that makes that statement says, find me a job. With my workload and my travel, As Brian mentioned, 48 hours. Sometimes it could be, double that when it comes to some of my responses. And one of the things that I always, in many cases, people, will say, "Hey, I'd love to get 30 minutes of your time." Um, Sometimes I can't, many times I cannot, but I will respond and say, "What can I help you with? What questions do you have? What assistance do you need?" And just be prepared whenever you get whenever you get the time or response, make it count when you're engaging a recruiter. As Brian mentioned, if you're in the queue, and you got to make sure that when we're dialoguing, that you make it count. I was on an event last week, and the lady she was just back and forth, like after 5 dialogues, she just wanted me to do everything, and so I was just had to just like go silent and kind of give her the resources, the website, and even gave her some tips. As Brian mentioned, that last slide, many times I'll give those statements on that slide to say, "Hey, this is a good strategy to how we can help you." It's a 50-50. It's not a me finding you a job, and so yeah. Be proactive. Don't just do the bare minimum and think that the military veteran team guys is just to find your job. I even give people a cheat sheet on how to tailor your resume. Use ChatGPT. Make it easy for the people that you're reaching out to assist you. Don't make it difficult where they got to spend an hour because you just won't do anything.
Appreciate it, Jeff. Well, folks, that concludes our mission transition podcast, if you will. However, we will still keep going live right now. So we would, before we start jumping into the Q&A, absolutely, on behalf of Peraton and the Peraton Military and Veterans team, say thank you to everyone that has participated and joined us today. We hope we didn't bore you to death too bad. These things are harder to put on than they look like, but we appreciate everyone coming in and coming down today and listening to us. Certainly feel free to reach out to us at militaryconnect@peraton.com. Certainly look at our careers page, careers.peraton.com. We also have a military and veterans page on our peraton.com website, where it also shows all the events that we're participating in as a team, whether it's in person or virtually. So if you're looking to engage with Peraton in other ways, or depending on where you might be at in the timeline and looking for a new role, that's a good way to locate us as well. Of course, the email address, our career site, and that takes it from there. We appreciate everyone coming down. So we will jump right in to some Q&A. Do we have any folks? I've seen it kind of ticking through. Do we got any questions on there so far that we can answer? I see Travis asked, is this a job opportunity or just a webinar? It's definitely not a job opportunity. This is just an information exchange. This is just us, trying to help, folks in the community to become better at interviewing. What else we got on there? I got something blocking my screen here. Can you please clarify the difference between a recruiter and a sourcer? I absolutely can. So recruiters and sourcers play two different functions in the talent acquisition process, right? So a recruiter is typically someone that might go on and post the job descriptions, set up interviews with hiring managers, send you forms to fill out as part of the hiring process, and so forth. So they're doing more of the full life cycle work of being a candidate for a role, right? Versus a sourcer is someone, because Jeff and I have done both these types of roles ourselves. So a sourcer is someone who works with a team of people. So there might be a hiring manager, a recruiter, and a sourcer working the same role, if you will. So a sourcer is then someone that just goes out to search, identify, and communicate with folks in particular talent pools, if you will. So as a sourcer, what I would do, I don't just deal with folks that necessarily apply to roles. I go find passive individuals in the market and try to engage them and get them interested in my role. Versus a recruiter does a lot more of the full lifestyle function of being a recruit, if you will, or a candidate for a role. Versus a sourcer kind of hands you off then. So as a sourcer, even though we're both playing the same role, kind of in that sense, I find people and then deliver them over somewhere else, basically, if you will. that are qualified. So a sourcer would then reach out to you and be like, hey, do you got a few minutes for the phone call? You might have to talk to a sourcer 15, 20 minutes because they want to make sure you've met the qualifications of the role, because they're going to go back then and give the information of how you've met the qualifications for the role, similar to what we were talking about in a email exchange in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing we would never do, we get asked this question quite a bit though, and it still surprises me kind of. I think folks would know we can't, but I couldn't tell you how many folks will reach out to me on LinkedIn, especially, and say, "Hey, Brian, I was looking at this role. Can you tell me who the hiring manager is?" No, absolutely not. You're crazy, man. Like, no, I can't tell you who the hiring manager is, because a hiring manager is a duty within a role, if you will. So a hiring manager is typically like a project manager or a SME or a program manager that works here and does actual work here at Peraton. They're not just somebody that interviews people all day. So, that's internal information. We can't just give you hiring manager names, those type of things. It's the same thing. I mean, you can't just call McDonald's and ask, hey, is Jeff there? When's Jeff come in? Like, they're gonna be like, oh, we can't tell you that. So we certainly can't do it at this organization either. So
right. Brian, one things, and that's a great point, is that always look at it this way, especially for the sake of time, because recruiters don't want to waste your time. You don't want to waste theirs. Is when you're engaging a recruiter and he's asking you a question or he's screening you, look at it like an interview. Like it's this the first phase of it's step one of getting to actually being referred to a hiring manager to say, hey, I think we ought to interview this person. So instead of, as Brian mentioned, trying to skip over a recruiter and talk directly to a hiring manager, because he don't want to see 70,000 applications. He don't want to see all of them. I always tell them it is an interview. When a recruiter is screening you, he is seeing whether you are a viable candidate that he can refer to a hiring manager, to an organization, and say, hey, we should probably consider interviewing this person. So whenever you're engaging them, treat it like an interview.
Absolutely. That's a good piece of information right there. I hope we were able to answer that question for you. What else do we got? Someone asked if this will be uploaded on YouTube. It absolutely will be, and it will also be uploaded to our military and veterans page on the Peraton.com website. We only upload the videos every 3 months though, so if you look at the stuff that's on there right now, it won't be the most recent things from the past couple of months. But after we record this one and I get the link, which usually doesn't come in until like Monday, then I send it up to our marketing team, that then drops it on our landing page, and landing page makes it to YouTube as well. So it will absolutely be on there. But if you've got our contact information though too, I know sometimes they do take a little bit of time to land on the page. If you email us at thatmilitaryconnect@peraton.com, I'm happy to send you the latest link to any of the podcasts though as well. What else?
And I've added those to Brian as well to the chat. So I just reposted it. So
I see you dropped it in there, yeah.
So it has me and Brian's LinkedIn information and Brett. And also when you open up that link, if you scroll, you'll see some of the recorded podcasts that's already been done on previous topics.
Yep. I see Henrietta asked, if there's several positions for the same job title, is it okay to apply to all positions or just one of them? That is an amazing question, actually. Yes, absolutely apply to every position. And I'll tell you why, though. Because they're not necessarily screening. They're all going to be at different phases, if you will. So if we might have, say, 6 help desk positions or desktop support analyst positions or something like that, if you will. One of those positions might be new. One might be already in the offer process. One they might have already interviewed 2 or 3 people on. And you don't really know that information up front, right? Because those positions will stay on the website till there's a start date on it. So even if we've already got an offer out to someone and they're going through some of the initial human resources processes, it stays there till there's a hire on it. So there's a start date on it for sure. So apply to them all, absolutely. And the good thing with like Peraton's website is once you're in it, applying to jobs is a snap, right? It doesn't take a lot of time. But what you do want to make sure is if it changes anything in the qualifications, requirements, or qualifications for the roles, in that sense. But if they're all like almost the exact same similar role, definitely apply to them all, though, for sure. So that was good question. So Gary asks, so does a sourcer find and screen the candidates and then connects them with recruiter or hiring manager? Absolutely does, Gary. No, that's a good one. So a sourcer, that's what we do when we're sourcing. We find and screen candidates. We make sure that they meet, the requirements, qualifications of the role, or very close to there too. And then we would send them to the recruiter and or the hiring manager. It kind of depends on the working system any particular group has. I've done it both ways where I would send it to the hiring manager and then CC the recruiter. Some I just send it to the recruiter. Some I just send it to the hiring manager. But that's basically what it is. That's someone that looked out for candidates. So you have a real good opportunity. If you're being contacted by sourcers, that's good in the sense that if you're getting screened by a sourcer, that's chances are you're getting seen by more people though then, right? Because if I reached out to you, I called you, I asked you those questions relative to the role, I took that information and I sent it forward, which means somebody then has to give me an answer then too, right? So that means people are looking at it in that sense. So it's good to be contacted by sourcers, absolutely. So if you're getting contacted by sourcers, anyone on the phone call, absolutely respond to them, even if it's no. I was a sourcer forever, so I got to tell you, I actually liked it, but I didn't mind if people were like, "Hey, dude, I'm not interested," and I'd be like, "All right, cool, man. I just put it on." Like that way, you got to hear from me for a minute, right? That doesn't mean you won't go hear from me forever. I mean, I still got a job to get paid for, so you might not hear from me for 6 months, but 6 months pass, I might be like, "Hey, Jeff, I know you said you weren't available before. What about now?" No, okay.
That's true. I've done sourcing and staffing, so yeah, it's just a different mindset, a different tasking that you have. But be professional with all of them, because you don't want to be memorable, because they may reach back out to you.
And I've got a question. So somebody missed the beginning part. It says, are Peraton career opportunities for military personnel open to everyone? Now they're open to everyone. So there's none of our roles. You actually can't still be in the military, or well, I guess you'll be in the reserves, but you can't be active duty military and take any of our full time roles, if you will. No, so they're definitely for transition service members, veterans, still serving reservists, or anyone else for that matter, though too. So the good thing is the information we deliver on our podcast, which is something we're pretty proud of though too. Is that the information is relevant regardless of who you are in the candidacy process, meaning that you don't have to be a transitioning service member or a veteran. This information is relevant to everyone that's in some, whether you're looking for a job, just transitioning out, making career transition moves, you name it. So yeah, definitely open for everyone. And let's see what else we got. So Richard says, how far out from my employment availability date should I begin to apply to jobs and actively seek employment? I've been told multiple answers, with the general ballpark being around 3 to 6 months to allow for multiple rounds of interviews for technical positions. Thoughts? No, that's I love that question too, Richard. It's going to be dependent on the organization and the kind of roles you're really kind of looking for. Our good answer around here is usually about the 90-day mark. Anything more than 3 months can be difficult because we don't just hold on positions, to hire for them, because it does cost the company money, right, to keep those positions unavailable or unfilled. But it is kind of a good answer that someone did give you. He said more technical roles, you might get away with a longer time frame, 120 days, perhaps, if you've got to go through, a traditional interview, then like a technical interview, maybe even sometimes a third interview, where I've seen on some of those higher end, software roles where they got to showcase some kind of ability or something. But yeah, I mean, 6 months would, in my opinion, anyway. I mean, like you said, you can ask a million people, you probably get a million different answers. But we've been doing this a long time, and I know what I can get hired and what I can't. 6 months for us would be way too far out. I wouldn't get any hiring managers to even agree to do an interview with you at 6 months out, to be honest. I mean, just wouldn't happen. 120 days is a stretch for me around here, but 90 days I can usually get a little more flexibility with. 120 to 90 anyway, because it does take, because we typically have about a 30-day process, meaning like from application to start date, 30 days. So
And Brian, just know that whenever you apply for a position, whether you decide to start applying 6 months out or 120 days out, if they're interested in you and they contact you, they're going to ask you, so when are you available? And that usually will indicate whether you're a little too farther out. They'll keep you in mind, but most of the time the recruiter will let you know we can't hold a position that long. So, so when you apply, I tell people many times, that recruiter or that company, they'll let you know whether you're too far out or whether they need someone that's a little closer. But don't be gun shy, because they're all different. There's proposals.
Right.
Sometimes position, it could be a proposal position, and you may not even know it. And the recruiter will reach out to you, and they may negotiate a contingent offer, where you continue, to keep it moving, keep looking for the opportunity. So, like Brian said, you're gonna get a lot of different responses from. It all depends on the company, and if they're looking immediately, then they're going to be on a shorter time frame.
Yeah. So we got a question from Harry. Harry says he's been asked questions. Some of these questions in past interviews about give me a weakness or tell me about a time you had to do this or that. Is there a good general way to respond to that? If you can't think of something specific, or should I really have something in mind already? Harry, yeah, absolutely. Because what happens is, it's kind of what we were talking about within there, is if you give a very generic response, though, if you don't have something prepared, that's why it's always good to have, kind of some of those 3 different scenarios prepared. Because if you don't have something prepared and you give a good general answer, or what you think's a good general answer, a lot of times it's going to really miss on some key pieces of the STAR method in the answer, or it's just going to be general enough that it's just not really showcasing your ability to do a particular function of whatever that question is asking for, right? So that's what the behavioral interview questions do. Those are the ones where you want to go into the most detail on. So if you're giving a very general answer, it could be affecting the outcome of the interview. I should say that. So definitely have some scenarios set up that are at least a win, a conflict, and a failure. What about you, Jeff? Same?
Yep, that's pretty much you hit it on that one. It's you don't want to be generic, like you said. Sometimes a question like that could catch you off guard. I mean, just thinking, with Brian just posed it, it made me pause for a second and say, okay, what are some of my weaknesses? You know what I mean? If you ask anybody that out of the blue, hey, what are some of your weaknesses? They probably have to pause for a second to decide what do I want to expose? What do I really want to say? What are weaknesses that I really want to expose? It may be something that you really don't want to expose. So that's why you want to have that kind of prepared, as Brian mentioned, have it kind of prepared as to a response if somebody asks you that, a professional response.
Absolutely. And, because there's a reason they're asking that question, though.
Yeah.
I mean, they're, typically they're not coming up with it. It's related to the office environment or what that office goes through from time to time.
Yeah.
In that sense. So Diana says she's not a veteran, but has a strong, background in IT and cloud computing, and just says tips were super helpful. It says thank you. So appreciate you, Diana. Pam wants to connect with the team. She says, what are questions interviewers like to hear at the end of the interview? Well, that's kind of what we were going over on that last slide there, one of the last slides there a little bit. So, you really want to start asking questions. That's a good chance to ask about, performance standards, what's ideal for success, growth potential, mentorship for growth, those type of things. Plenty of stuff out there. And Stephen, should you reapply for positions that were selected for before that have been reopened? Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
I know, and folks, if you don't know why that happens, especially because we are a contract company though too. So sometimes we open a role, the customer says, hey, we need, we need another cloud AWS cloud person. So we open a role and, we start looking at people, and then the customer says, actually, we changed our mind. We think we're going to go another direction with it. So then we close the role, right? I mean, nobody hired it, or the role was canceled, or just put on hold while the customer is determining what they really want to do. And then, what happens is then when they say, hey, you know what, actually we are going to move ahead with this AWS role, then they may have changed some of the requirements from the original posting though too. They do tend to do that when they close it. They'll come back with additional things, or maybe they'll take some qualifications out, they'll add some in. It's always something. But what happens is we have to open a new role then. Since we closed the other role, we aren't allowed so there's some laws and stuff out there. I don't know all that kind of information. I'm not an HR person in that scenario, where we have to reopen a new role to give opportunity for applications, yada yada.
Right. And Brian, this is I know this is kind of off topic when it comes to interviewing. That's the networking piece. If you see a position that pops back out there, that's when you reach out to your network, or you reach out to one of us and say, hey, what's going on with this position? It was posted 3 months. What's going on with it? We can look into it and find out what's the details of it. Is it funded? Is it pending? Is it on hold? Is it back in proposal? Whatever it may be. That's goes into the networking as well, which is another podcast.
Yeah. But one thing I could throw out there too, I guess I could probably even add it to the slide deck now that I think about it there too, and interview preparation, and why some of it is very important though too. Because more than likely what you will run into if you haven't interviewed yet, or you're doing a transition, or it's been a long time since you interviewed, I can tell you anymore, be prepared for a multi-person interview for sure. It's very rare that it's a one-on-one interview anymore, at least in my opinion. I mean, it does happen, but typically you're in an interview with at least 2 to 3 people. So, that's why preparing these answers is really key. I mean, because I don't know about anybody else on the call. I mean, I'm about as confident as guys that come, but you put me in an interview and I got to be thinking fast on the spot, and then put 3 people there that are staring at me, waiting for me to answer my question. Like, I'm starting to sweat too, right? Like, I'm like, oh, what did I do with that crap? And the next thing I know in my head, I'm like, crap, I forgot everything now. I don't know anything. I'm never going to get this job, blah, blah, blah. Because I just brain dumped it all the second I sat in the chair, right? So that's why, that's really important.
Preparation.
What's that?
I said preparation.
It really is.
It's hard work. I mean, it's a lot of stuff that we've covered on the slide, but if you apply as much as possible and prepare, you're just going to create a better opportunity, because you could be 3 people that they interview and the other 2 didn't do anything, and you just you may be the least qualified. You qualified because you got the interview, but you were the best prepared, and you respond and answer the right questions. I've seen many times. I tell people this all the time. I'm not the best recruiter out there, but when it comes to preparation, I'm going to outdo a lot of other people, recruiters that are a little cocky, and they feel like they don't need to do it in homework and just preparation. So don't fall into that. I got a great resume. I got the qualifications for this job, and I'm not going to do all I have to do.
That's a good mention.
I just need an interview.
That's a really good mention, because, especially the work that Jeff and I do, we run into a lot of folks that are retiring from, 25-year military careers, and, think you're just going to walk right into some roles. And it's just not going to happen if you're not preparing like this, because the counterparts out here, I mean, they're smacking these interviews too. I mean, they're really preparing for these interviews, especially if they're going for these, these senior roles, project manager, program manager roles, those type of things. Like these are preparation level roles, and you got to come. If you can get the interview on a role like that, I mean, you got to prepare. You're just not going to. You'll never get by. Because the other people preparing and will get by. Gary asked, what's the best way to discuss pay for an entry for entry to mid-level roles? He says, I always said that I'm flexible, but what is in the job description that is listed for California, but not sure if that's the right way to approach it. There's so many ways to do it, Gary, but one thing I can tell you, there's been a lot of change in salary things over the past, probably 10 to 15 years. What I can tell you, speaking from Peraton anyways, we have pay bands though. So we all have pay bands for a particular role. So say a pay band on a role, I'm just throwing numbers out there. is from 60 to 80,000. So the role will pay between 60 to 80,000. Okay, regardless if you were making 38,000 before that, we can't just pay you. You know, and if you're doing salary negotiation, and you might think 50's a good number from 38, it is, but that doesn't mean if you say, well, you know, I'll take 50, we still can't pay you 50. We would have to pay you between the pay band of 60 to 80. But within that, also keep in mind the pay band of 60 and 80 isn't also the negotiable range necessarily either, in the sense that the top end means that's the max that position could ever pay. So if you met the knowledge, skills, and ability, education requirements to come in at say $78,000, $2,000 is the max pay you can ever, is more you can ever receive on that role, though, in that sense. But there's also going to be qualifying factors. You have to have years. There's a qualifying years of experience to get to the higher end versus the lower end, right? In that sense. So in salary negotiations, kind of depending on the organization. What you don't want to do is waste your time, though, because flexible is great, but nobody's flexible, in my opinion. I've been doing this a long time because I deal with a lot of people I've worked with over the years that say, well, you know, I'm pretty flexible. So you'll take 30,000? Well, no. Well, you're not very flexible then, because we need to know where you're at so we don't waste your time, though, too. This isn't just about making us the most money possible, right? What we don't want to do is waste your time or our time. So if you say like, hey, you know, entry level, I want to make, you know, 70, but I'm flexible. So you want to give a range, though. So that's what gives us a starting point. You say, I would like to make 75, but I'm flexible. You know, that type of thing. Because we need a starting point, because if our position, if you come in and say, hey, I need 120, but I'm flexible, but I know we pay 68,000 for the role, we're about 50% flexibility there, right? So I'm gonna be like, hey, I'll probably tell you, hey Gary, like we're gonna be way off here, man. If you're looking for 120, we're not gonna be able to touch that, in that sense. So that's what you kind of, but you know, giving a starting point or at least a range. I know a lot of folks are uncomfortable saying 120 or 80,000 or, you know, 100K flat, you know, those type of things. At least give a range point, right? You know, to create some starting point. You know, whether, you know, I always say what I want, 10 over, 10 under type of thing, you know. So it's like, yeah, I'll take 140 or 160, you know, in that
And
range.
if you ever dialogue, if you ever in the dialogue with a recruiter about that, and you know, if he says, well, like Brian just mentioned, well, we're far off. You know, if he doesn't give you a number, you can say, well, what number did you have in mind? What's the target number that you guys have in mind for this role? And then it kind of gives you the option to say, I can take it, I can't go that low. In some cases, if you're entry level, you're just like, you know, I need to start. I need some experience, and you may be able to swallow that number. So it's not mentioned like we're trying to lowball you. We're just being upfront and honest and saying, hey, this is not a perfect fit for you. So, you know, from a recruiter perspective, never think that a recruiter is lowballing you. That's just not what recruiters do. We don't set, recruiters don't set those numbers. So if you're usually going to have a salary discussion for the most part with a recruiter. And so never assume that they're just trying to haggle and get less money. They're just being upfront. This is what the target number is.
Right. Because they want you to get hired too, man. Honestly,
Yeah.
you know, like I said, we've done both sides. I've been the recruiter and the sourcer and the hiring manager before all that stuff. You know, at the end of the day, we don't want to keep contacting folks for a role. We just want we just want somebody to come work for us, you know. Like, so at the end of the day, we want to get you hired there too. So there's not. I promise, you know, as someone that's been in this talent game for a long time, I haven't been in any backdoor, you know, seedy meetings where we'll be like, let's find the lowest person we can ever pay.
Yeah.
And let me tell you why, because that sucks. Because you know, if you can sucker somebody into taking 20,000 under market for a role, guess what? Guess what you're going to be doing in 90 days?
Yes.
At the job board, find another person to hire in that role. And you'll be right back on that over again. So, you know, that's kind of, you know, the negotiation piece should be as scary in that sense. Like, I don't think there's a lot of lowballing going on out here, because you want to, if you're not within the market ranges for individuals, you're going to lose individuals, so. So what other questions we got? So Josh says, given his current eligibility timeline, he's not aware of his hiring time. Is there a value in starting the conversation with my interest in a specific open role to begin sharing my background and intent to better align myself with your hiring process and expectations? Like kind of we talked about a little bit earlier, with timeline, if you're still transitioning out, Josh, you don't want to go too far out, because we'll probably get a lot of lack of interest of people willing to talk to you a year out from transitioning or whenever you're going to be able to take your next role. But 6 months out actually is probably a pretty good starting point to at least start engaging with people, to make sure that your resume is meeting kind of, industry expectations for whatever roles you're looking into, right? And those type of things. But definitely 6 months out is worth having, some of those conversations to at least make sure you've got your starting point aligning well, or what adjustments, you can make in resumes, presentation of anything, what roles you're really looking for, those type of things. And I think you still on there? Oh, so you paused out for a sec. So scrolling on down. So Henrietta, how do you answer a question that is inquiring who you got your clearance from? Is that a question relevant for interviews? That was kind of a mixed bag for me, Henrietta. Certainly as someone, here in the work I've done over the years, I've supported some of those highly cleared customers, in McLean, Fort Meade, and so forth. So it's going to really kind of depend. It should be a pretty basic question, though, in the sense, because you're either going to get it from the DoD or the U.S. government, realistically, in that sense. So that was a tough one for me to give you 100% right answer on. I guess it would sort of depend on who I was talking to in that sense, right? Or where and in what setting. Because I know as someone that's sourced, I was a sourcer for, full scope poly style work here in, the National Capital Region. And certainly, there are certainly ambiguous ways to ask someone if they have a clearance from particular organizations that most people that do that kind of stuff know how to ask and answer, if that makes sense. Steven, does Peraton provide clearance upgrades from CI to full scope, or is still requiring you to have the clearance before applying? We do sponsor some full scope clearances for sure, but it's going to be specific to a particular contract or skill set most of the time. But our job descriptions will tell you, though, if you go, probably one of the best ways to figure out which ones will is go into our job search and in parentheses put in ability to obtain in the search box, and then go on to the left side in the filters and put TSSCI, and it'll bring up all those roles. They'll have the CI, those in there, plus the CI poly, but if there's any full scope ones in there, that'll tell you the ones that will give you the ability to obtain. But if it doesn't say ability to obtain, it won't. But of course, we don't advertise, whether it's CI or full scope, but it'll just say poly at that rate.
Brian, also to add to that, because I get that a lot about clearances, and this is a good guideline to kind of go by. And if you reach out to me, I've kind of created this information sheet as well. And usually when it says active clearance required, the typical scenario is immediate classified work. It's immediate hire, and it's usually no sponsorship. So if it says required, typically there's no sponsorship. As Brian mentioned, ability to obtain a clearance, that's usually a long-term contract with some unclassified start, right? Sure. So it's a little slower and due to the investigation, and usually it's the employer will sponsor you. If it says preferred, that's an optional clearance benefit, and the timeline is really flexible. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's offered later. So if it says preferred, then it's, it's nice to have, and and so forth. And it's an optional clearance benefit.
Yeah. I would say, in my opinion here, and this is an opinion, but, I don't have any data to back it up, if you will, but, I've just been doing it a long time. And it's typically, for me, when it comes to obtaining a clearance from any way, shape, or form, really, it's typically skill set based and candidate pool based, meaning
Mm-hmm.
if there's a huge candidate pool, so if you're trying to get a TSSCI clearance on an entry level cybersecurity role, we there's candidates out there for that. So the government doesn't need to process those clearances. They'll get plenty of candidates for that. Versus, you start talking about, some of this machine learning, AI with metadata and Python and all this kind of stuff, where they want someone with, PhD level, this and that. Those are instances where they might. But then, as Jeff said too, there's these real large swaths of work where they need a large amount of the candidate pool, so will do some clearance sponsorship as well. But it's not highly common though.
Right.
And that's been everywhere I've worked pretty much. It's sponsoring a clearance isn't a very common thing. So where everyone gets it from, I can't tell you I know that answer though either, folks, because I know it's either the DoD or the government. And I think that's just about all the questions we have. I don't see any more popping in there. We'll give it another second or two, see any pop in there. If anybody has any more questions, I know Jeff and I really appreciate everyone coming on today and being very interactive. Everyone that came today, of course, will receive invites for our season 1 of 2026 podcast sessions. They do change. So even if you watch some of the ones we have on our website now, they change. I update them quite a bit with just, new information or how we present it or the flow of the stuff we do. So, so I guess we'll go ahead and close it out. I know one last thing I always like to throw out on the podcast myself is if you are in the job market, and it's been tough going and, you're not getting a lot of action, not getting a lot of callback, not getting a lot of interviews. You're not the only one though, so don't feel like it's just yourself. It's a tough job market out there. So that's why we put some of these things on to help give folks some better avenues of approach, if you will, to break through some of these systems and this black hole of being a candidate everywhere. But if it is a struggle for you right now to get action going on some things, just know you're not alone. It's not just you that somehow can't figure it out. It's a lot of people, so
Mm-hmm.
have some solace in that anyway. That if it is a struggle, it's not just you, and that's what we're here for. Jeff, any last words you'd like to toss out?
Yeah, that's it. Just it's one of the things that I do a demonstration at the end of many of my in-person events where I bring up candidates that they have, and I put a gold medal, a silver medal, and a bronze medal. The gold is the job. Everybody's competing to get that gold medal. Many times you could be qualified and become the silver medalist or the bronze medalist. It doesn't mean that you are not qualified. It just means a better athlete got the job. Someone was either better qualified or they interviewed better. So you got to get back. You got to keep going until you become it. Me and Brian, we've all failed interview, thought we were going to get the job, but didn't get it. So stay in the fight. You have to, and continue to learn. Follow these podcasts. Me and Brian, we're sponges to learning. We're always learning. So, and we try to share that information back to you. So just remember, you may be qualified, but just be a better athlete got the gold medal than you.
Very good. Well, I appreciate it for closing out, Jeff. And like I said, on behalf of Peraton's Military and Veterans team, we thank you for coming. As always, reach out to us at militaryconnect.peraton.com. Certainly visit our careers page, careers.peraton.com. And if you are applying to anything, reach out to one of us, Brian, Jeff, Brent, we'll help and see what we can do to advocate for your applications. Internally, we'll be that internal point of contact, see if we can get some action going for you. But you got to do some things that we ask. But but we'll go from there when you reach out to us. But we appreciate everybody's time. Thank you again. And, you'll see this on our website here shortly. Thank you, everyone.